A company is not just a machine. It is a worldview made visible. A worldview that runs on beliefs, on source code. And typically those are beliefs and source code in the minds of the founders, the owners, and those who are involved in the top decision-making processes. There are a couple of beliefs or source code that can be flawed and that are very typical and very common if they are not actively being challenged. And in my line of work, I often deal specifically with those beliefs. Now, when we fix sales organizations, when we fix the revenue engine from marketing to sales to customer success, and often including product as well, the pricing models and so forth, we look at fixing the margins, then it's often about way more than just adding layers and layers of processes. It's actually often quite the opposite, removing things and specifically removing old operating models that are running in people's heads. And I will uncover and unpack what the top 10 of those beliefs, of those flawed worldviews are that I run into again and again and again, and what the solutions and fixes and adjustments are to reprogram them in order to run a more coherent organization, but also set up the company for long-term success and enterprise value. So let's unpack them one by one. Number one is that growth equals headcount. It is very tempting to believe that more employees means success. And it is very natural to think like this if you came from an early startup environment or you came from proving success under very tough circumstances with very few people. And now you have the capital. Now you have the funds, you have the means to actually hire people. And what becomes initially but is a relief initially becomes an addiction. So you in the beginning you realize you have certain bottlenecks, certain gaps. You need to fill in with outside talent, but after a while it becomes a metric that stands by its own. We just started a new market and we hired 20 salespeople in this market. Great success. We managed to get to open an office that starts with 50 employees, including HR, customer success, and so forth. What that actually means on the ground is a different story. But the idea that it is a success because we opened an office, we hired people, becomes often an unchallenged belief. It becomes an unchallenged measure of success. Now, the problem, of course, with headcount is the more people you hire, the more need for coordination you have, the more middle management layers you need, the more training, the more onboarding is required. They also cost money, of course. Hiring costs can be very high. You need to hire potentially external agencies, or you have internal recruiters that also cost money. So there's a lot involved. So hiring and headcount is not to be taken lightly. There are also risks to it. Sometimes it is the biggest expense or second biggest expense in some companies. And if the company were to ever run into financial, let's say, struggles, then the first thing that needs to be cut typically is headcount. So it is a double-edged sword. Number two is that culture equals perks or incentives. Now, especially when you come from a world where you're often, as a founder, as an owner, very much involved with the operations, with every decision, there is a point when you probably get challenged on that and you get a lot of pushback. So then you tend to go into the opposite direction, overcompensate and letting people free rein and just allowing things to work out, give people the freedom, and then often it also has its downsides because it goes too much in the other extreme. This is often the moment when consultants come in or when there is an initiative, especially by HR, let's make people happy or let's make sure that they feel good at work. And also let's use this for our talent acquisition strategy. Let's give them perks. For example, free gym membership that's included in their compensation package, or the ping pong table, the notorious Pizza Fridays, whatever it is, the parties. So culture starts to being seen and misrepresented as those perks, as those, let's call them add-ons which have obviously nothing to do with the organization or the core reason of why everybody's there. And those perks often end up being band-aid solutions and symbolic actions, symbolic assets that don't really have much to do with culture at all anyway. Culture is the way the company operates. Culture is the way people communicate with each other. Culture is the way how managers are leading. Culture is the role model of those people in charge. Culture is if there's execution discipline, if there's a culture of just starting 1,000 things, or if there's a culture of finishing the 10 most crucial things. Culture is not pizza Fridays and ping pong tables. Culture is having a disciplined organization that actually runs on specific rules, expectations, and norms, and is actually lived and embodied by the role model of its leaders. That's culture. And so if culture is being reduced to perks, then it is very obvious that a lot of managers, owners belittle the topic of culture and almost get triggered when they even hear the word. By the way, same with empathy, which is also often misunderstood. But the culture gets a very bad reputation because it is being reduced to perks that have very little to do on how the leadership actually runs, on what kind of atmosphere is present in the work environment, and that ultimately leads to organizational resources being transferred into organizational results. Number 3 is that revenue equals value. Now, this is a very dangerous belief, source code. And the reason for it is a belief you can easily get addicted to, and you get a lot of validation for this belief. There will be a lot of people applauding the company for its top line revenue. Amazing, you smashed your sales targets. Amazing, the company grew 20% month over month. That is impressive, that is amazing. That's also something that early stage investors want to see. Completely understandable. It's validation in all levels. It's validation in terms of the company is doing something right, people are buying the product. Now, that is valuable in itself, but that does not equal value. Value is me looking at what happens after the sale. Those customers that I acquire, do they stick around? Do they buy again from me? Do I even have a product that they can buy again? Or do I only go for one-off transactions and invest a lot of money in my sales and marketing in order to acquire those customers, but then I let them go? Or do I have an actual strategy, an actual approach of after the customer gets acquired, there is a follow-up product, there is upselling, there is retention, and there's also something, some real thought being given to the costs that I'm having with the execution of each of those services or the products that I'm delivering. My cost of goods sold, my contribution margins. That is value. It is not value to have top line growth, to have 126% sales target achievement, but ending up in a situation where you are paying money for each customer. You basically pay them to be your customers because your sales and marketing costs and your cost of goods sold are way higher than the actual revenue that you're getting from each customer. Belief number 4 is that TAM equals strategy. TAM means total addressable market. That's a theoretical idea. I mean, it can also be, of course, founded in a lot of market research, but still it is a theoretical idea of who are all the people who would or could buy your product. And often the way to thinking about this in such a manner, of course, comes from investors' expectations. I want to see that on your slide decks. I want to have an idea of how big this market is, how big is the opportunity. And all of this has its justification. You want to, of course, know the market size. But if that becomes the strategy, or if there is an uncritical idea of having a large addressable market means that we're doing something right, or it becomes it gives us a false sense of security, we're in a big market, we're good, then it becomes very dangerous. It leads to a lot of fluff. And specifically in marketing, you often see in the real world that the marketing teams start trying to speak to everyone, just try to capture as much as potential demand as possible, which is then being passed on in the form of unqualified leads to the sales team. And there's a whole chain reaction that then happens that I'm talking about on different occasions. But the issue here is just focusing on TAM as a strategy lacks a lot of nuances, and it typically leads to a situation where where commercial efforts become so diffuse, they become so widespread, they end up speaking to everyone and they end to nobody. So there's a certain discipline that is required specifically in any discussions about TAM, about market approaches, go-to-market approaches, that often is not being taken serious enough, because the idea of having a big TAM provides an illusion of safety. Number 5 is that loyalty equals performance. You're probably still having some employees on board who were with you in the old days, in the beginning, the start of the company, and you rewarded their loyalty with shares. And so now obviously they have a vesting period of a certain amount of time. You want to keep them in the company, they deserve it. And you probably rewarded them with leadership positions in your company. And it also is good for you because you have good relationships with them. So you always, you have an informal communication channel if you need to get things done or if you need to understand what's going on. Now, the problem is, of course, the more the company grows, the more the demands on each role grow as well. Now, your early employee who was a developer who taught themselves coding has now been rewarded to be vice president of engineering and is leading a team of 20-25 developers, engineers, front end and back end. That is a bit of a different scope. And the question becomes, is that person properly trained, prepared for this role? And often, unfortunately, what happens is leaders or people who have been promoted into those roles are completely overwhelmed with these responsibilities, with top talent then leaving because they're not happy with the leadership style, or they don't feel it's really going in the direction it should go. Those leaders then often are protected because they are friends with the founders, rightly so, because they have been in the trenches since day one, and it then creates a whole cascade effect of institutionalized incompetence. And you see this across sales teams. You see this in key positions of the organization, of the company, and that of course erodes your top talent acquisition. It erodes your so-called bench. Bench meaning, if you step away as a founder one day because you sell the company, who will be in charge when you're gone? Will the department still run by themselves? Are they run by competent people? Are they run by people who are up for the job? Or are they run by people who mostly waited for your directions, who were super loyal to you, and who would also not really find their way around anymore the moment you would leave? And so they would also leave, meaning the departments would collapse without any leadership at that moment. Or is there a bench of successors, of people who can step in? Is there a culture of making sure that people who came in later in the company actually have a way of rising up, of being promoted? Is that the culture? Or can you bring in outside talent to fill those gaps? So loyalty does not necessarily equal competence or performance in many ways. Number 6 is that the founder is the company. And you hear this often in statements like, I run things based on my instinct. Like, I go by my gut feeling. And I firmly believe that intuition is a completely underrated tool in decision making, and it is a very high impact. It is a high impact input to decision making. But there's a huge difference between tactically employing intuition or basically running one's own gut feelings and impulses as a strategy for running the company, which of course you could imagine creates a lot of chaos, but also it leads to a situation where you do not have the necessary consistency for systems, structures, and processes to actually run their course. But with constant interventions, especially paired with shiny object syndrome, the organization's focus just scatters all across the realm, and in the end, nothing really gets done anymore, because every single week There's a new impulse, there's a new gut feeling, there's a new direction. And that happens often by default if it's not proactively being addressed, and if the founder is not proactively taking steps to being self-aware and adjusting their decision making and how they communicate with the teams. And so, of course, if you hear statements like, I run this based on my instincts, especially in early stages, that can be a very successful strategy. There's no doubt about it. But once the company grows to a certain scale, and once there are way more stakeholders involved, way more employees involved, investors, customers, vendors, and so forth, you reach certain limits, and you reach the phase of diminishing returns, where just running things on impulse, it doesn't work anymore. It doesn't deliver you the results. It actually now creates more harm and damage than doing good. And of course, if in the past it has been successful, it's very hard to let go of it as well, especially when things don't go the way you want. As a founder and owner, you're tempted to jump in and, of course, take over the steering wheel. But sometimes, again, it can create more harm than good, and it erodes the transferability of the company. And when we speak of enterprise value and what makes the company valuable to a potential buyer and acquirer, it is actually a company that is designed to run without the owner and founder being involved in decisions or making all of those calls, but a company that is run based on processes, systems, and structures that are being steered, that are being architected, that of course are being iterated, but that are not dependent on the impulses of one person. Next is that hustle equals resilience. We are outworking everyone. We are working harder than anybody else in our industry. Like our sales agents, they're up until 10 p.m. each night. Our sales development reps are on every single industry event, and they are the ones who are handing out the most business cards. Hustle and grind is, of course, like in any competitive environment, a tool, a tactic, a method, and it's undoubtedly showing success in companies that take their chances, that take charge, take advantage of opportunities. Of course, have an edge over companies that are just laid back and lazy and let opportunities pass. There's no doubt about it. But there's a bit more nuance to this as well. You can get lost in the hustle and the grind, but often that shows, especially for an outside observer, it shows me immediately that the company is probably held together more by chaos and adrenaline than through leveraged actions, through systems, processes, and actual workflows. And once you have systems, workflows, and leverage, like you do fewer things, but you do things that actually move the needle. If you apply your work ethic and your hustle, then your ability to operate at scale and to outwork everybody else, that's a whole different story. But often the hustle and the grind is used as a substitute, almost as an excuse not to build the proper systems and processes. And so you end up in a continuous mode of exhaustion, a continuous mode of just trying to bridge with muscle power what the system should actually be doing. And of course, that is not transferable. That is not leading to enterprise value. Next in line is happy customers equals happy investors. I'm personally very much of the mind that customer focus is key. That if you add value to customers, you solve their problems, they reward you financially. That should be the philosophy and the operating model of the company. But there's more to this. It's not just about happy customers in one-off transactions. The real question is, does the customer satisfaction, the reviews that you're showing on your slides, does that actually translate in net revenue retention? Does it translate in upsells? Does it translate in expansion revenue? Does it translate into renewals if you have a subscription model? Does it translate into repeat sales? This is where customer satisfaction actually translates into capital logic. Now, that is relevant for investors or strategic buyers, because what are they looking for? They want to know that if I acquire this company, these customers will still be a source of revenue, regardless of the founder being involved or not. I want to literally buy this stream of revenue. Those customers that are loyal to the company, that have been acquired already with sales and marketing money, that are now in the company, and they keep buying, regardless of the ownership change. They probably will not even notice. And once they keep buying, they're loyal customers. Now me as an acquirer, if I'm a strategic acquirer, for example, or if I want to integrate this company into my portfolio, I can now cross-sell other products and services to those existing loyal customers who are already in the habit of buying from this company. Right? I can now add additional services to them. And so only then it really becomes interesting for me as an acquirer. Of course, fringe cases aside, if I want to buy a company because of its top talent or its technology, that's a different story. But this is really a small percentage. Most of the time, it's not something that companies can count on if they want to get acquired. But if you want to increase your chances and your optionality, of course, happy customers need to translate into repeat revenue, into net revenue retention. And only then, happy customers equal happy investors. Next in line is that activity equals progress. Activity is anything that is about starting things, adding things, starting new pilots, new projects in the company. And it's very tempting to do this, especially if you came out of an early stage where you had limited capabilities and you wanted to do a lot of things, but you were not able to. You didn't have the right talent, you didn't have the capacity, the bandwidth. And suddenly you now have the headcount, you have the people, now you want to do things, you want to try things. And it very often leads to a situation where every single week there is a new project to do, a new initiative to do, based on a conversation the founder had with an investor, based on a conversation the CTO, the chief technical officer, had with another CTO that they met at a conference, based on something that somebody read in an article. And so that's called shiny object syndrome. So what often happens then is that the organization gets being pulled in 1,000 directions. The capacity gets stretched into starting a lot of things every single week, and very few things actually get finished and get completed. And the result of this is that the organization finds itself in a state of confusion. Performance standards just erode and evaporate because like everybody always has the excuse, I have too much on my plate, or I cannot really focus on my core job description. And I found this nowhere more dangerous and more explicit than in product teams. When you see the product roadmap actually that's being defined at the beginning of the year, 6 months in, nothing has really been done, but everybody in the product team is involved in the new AI project that doesn't bring any value at all. It just looks good on an investor slide. And every single week, the product team is pulled into a new project or even demands by existing customers. And ultimately, you end up never really finishing what was on the product roadmap defined since the beginning of the year. And sometimes this can drag year over year over year, where the entire organization is in a constant state of reactivity and doesn't have the execution discipline to actually finish things and get them out of their way. And lastly, the final one, the story is not the proof, but the proof is the story. So in many cases, when we think about the advice that a lot of founders got in terms of tell a good story, have a good narrative, that is a bit 2021 unicorn bubble era thinking. Back then, founders were raising millions of dollars based on childhood stories. We are now in an era, especially since 2022, that investors do way more due diligence. They scrutinize companies way more than they ever did before, and there is just a different standard of what constitutes enterprise values, of what they're willing to pay a multiple for. Here you have a classic example of an outdated frame, of an outdated belief that belongs to a different era. The proof is the story, means that you want to be able to show actually cohort retention. We go back to, can you actually retain those customers? Cohort retention, margins. Can you show net revenue retention? Can you show EBITDA? This becomes way more important than I can only show you guys top line growth and my ARR. If it's even recurring revenue, maybe it's just one-off transactions. That was impressive back in the days in 2020 and 2021 during the bubble era. But these days, it's not anymore enough. Like, it requires real numbers. It requires real customer retention. And having a focus on customer retention, on customer expansion, is typically also the road to forcing a cultural change. Like when we talk about culture equals perks, when the metrics, when the incentives change, when the organization starts focusing on retention, that creates a whole trickle effect down the entire revenue organization and how you do marketing, because that's where retention starts with the first impression, how sales builds relationship, how customer success or account management takes it to the next level, how product designs the products. If you start with the end game in mind and the proof that you actually want to show and need to show to investors, then what you need to fix and what you need to adjust in your entire company becomes very obvious, and it trickles down backwards to all the functions that actually create this proof in the first place.